Story 1. You just get so tired. It feels like there is no resting because there is always the pervasive feeling that you should be doing, making, or fixing something. Poverty means constant planning for the next meal, the next bill, or the next crisis. Story 2. How small activities like bringing Valentines for everyone in class or holding a bake sale were very stressful. Story 3. The constant fear of running out of money creates a strange obsession and guilt about spending, even when finances are decent. I grew up poor and my partner grew up upper middle class. We have managed to build a comfortable life, but I still have panic attacks about money and affording essentials like food and rent. They are supportive but confused about why I get so upset. My response is always, money can run out. Story 4. When you are starving and there is nothing to eat, the only option left is to try to sleep because you hope that when you wake up, you will not feel so hungry. Story 5. How much relationships matter. You are a lot safer in a dangerous neighborhood if you know and have good allies and friends there. It is a lot easier to share a bedroom with 4 or so other people if you like those people. You cannot afford that new car part, but if you know someone in the neighborhood who fixes cars, they might help you for a little cash. Having solid, good relationships with people you have history with can make a world of difference. Story 6. Your parents not being able to support you into adulthood. Mine stopped being able to when I was 15. I can always tell someone did not come from poverty when their suggestion to somebody facing financial troubles is, talk to your parents. Story 7. One thing people who weren't poor don't really understand is how you always had to think about money for every little thing. Even simple activities like snacks or going to the movies weren't just fun ideas. It was always, can we afford it? Or, do we have enough to cover everything else? I remember wearing hand-me-downs that didn't fit quite right and pretending not to care when kids teased me, or when the power would get cut off and we would sit around with candles. It wasn't just about not having things. It was the constant worry and knowing that one little thing going wrong could mess everything up. That's the part people don't really see. Story 8. Being poor is very expensive. For example, if you cannot afford to pay a speeding ticket, it will accrue late fees, making it even harder to pay off. If you need money immediately to buy food and pay rent, payday loan shops can help you, but with very high interest rates, so you will end up paying back much more than you borrowed. If you have a toothache but cannot afford to see the dentist, it can develop into something worse and more costly to fix. Story 9. Food insecurity. I am 60 and even now, having no debt and being in a good situation, I still hoard food and keep any leftovers. I remember going hungry or only having a small portion to eat with no seconds. Story 10. The shame you experience when trying to fit in or act like everyone else who was not poor, and having someone point it out in front of others to bring you down a notch. Story 11. Small problems become large ones when you do not have adequate savings. Any extra expense can be catastrophic. Story 12. How difficult it is to escape generational poverty. Story 13. Lack of choice. People think poor people just make poor choices because they want to. Now, most of the time, poor people can choose from a few very difficult options. Even if they choose the best one, they are still treated unfairly for it. Story 14. Just how much headspace money takes up. You always think about money. You think about when more money is coming in. Change is not unnecessary. It is vital. Money is like a drug. You love and hate it at the same time. Story 15. The anxiety you feel at the cash register, knowing there is nothing else you can put back, that you genuinely need every item and it is the cheapest possible price, but somehow it is still too expensive. That feeling never goes away. Story 16. I wanted to work at about 8. In my child mind, I thought it would help because my mother did not work. My father earned the bare minimum, and they had a difficult relationship. I learned not to hope for Christmas presents early on. Story 17. Hunger. That dull pain that eats you through to your backbone and you cannot escape, even through tears, is something only understood if you have experienced it. The anxiety and shame associated with grocery shopping. The panic when the register total is higher than your mental calculations halfway through, and the shame of putting groceries back. Please understand this panic total check and playing the game of how much can I get for my money during checkout. Having to kill a pet so you can eat. Those rabbits and chickens we had were quickly turned into meat sources during lean times. It was hard for an 11-year-old to understand that Bun Bun was not a pet and not to get attached. I went vegan for a while as an adult because I was so traumatized. But to this day, I'll eat a rooster as soon as it utters its first crow because I have no tolerance for those mean animals. The poverty smell. There is a smell associated with poverty that cannot be described. I will be in public, catch a whiff, and instantly be transported back to my childhood and teen years. If you know. Story 18. Poor people often decide to buy things that make them happy when they can, instead of constantly saving only for what they need. Story 19. Food guilt. I have food insecurity, but the guilt is just as strong. Every bit of food I eat when money starts to get low, or even when I am visiting people who have money, I feel like I am stealing from the rest of the household. I think, I'm hungry. But if I eat these 2 pieces of toast, that's 2 pieces less for my partner, parent, sibling, or friend who might need it more. As the oldest child, forgoing things so others could have them is a part of my DNA. Story 20. That beans on toast is an acceptable meal for any time of day, possibly even for all 3 meals. Story 21. Being poor is a significant health risk. That $10 greasy food that people say serves the homeless does not contribute to their longevity. Hygiene is expensive. Bath soaps, clean running water, and unshared toilet seats are luxuries. Poor people often lack insurance, making them just one bad medical bill away from an unrecoverable credit score. It is a vicious circle of death. Story 22. As a fellow poor child, the student with body odor in class probably did not have deodorant or could not afford the proper deodorant. This could also be true for the adult with body odor in your life. Be mindful and considerate sometimes. Story 23. Maybe Obamacare has helped, but healthcare wasn't a thing. Need stitches? The lady across the street did that for hamburger meat. Got jumped in the bathroom and have a big knot on your head? Lay down in the dark while your mom tells you not to fall asleep. I joined the United States Coast Guard when I turned 18, and boot camp was the first time I had been to a dentist. My mom had mental health issues. She would get jobs and then lose them. She used me as a pawn in her games with my dad. I went to 21 schools from 7th grade to graduation. You don't get to go to college when you have been to 9 different high schools and have months-long gaps between them. People say it's about making good choices. What if you don't know anyone who makes those, like ever? I joined the military and pulled myself up by my bootstraps, so to speak. Took its toll on my body for sure. But I would be dead or in prison if I hadn't had a 10th grade teacher who wrote me a plan in detention that was the best advice I ever got. Story 24. When you are a child and realize that you should never ask for things or show that you want something because it only makes your parents upset since they cannot get it for you. Never finishing school projects because you know they cannot afford the supplies, so you accept the failing grade. Being the only child in your class who did not go on the field trip, so you work in the school office all day. If there are more of you, they let you sit in the cafeteria or library all day. Then, to finish it off, when you are a senior and your parents ask about class rings or yearbooks, you tell them you never received the form or simply forgot about it. Story 25. Going to the grocery store and not being able to afford the food you carefully budgeted for because the price of an item increased. The most mortifying experience is getting to the register and discovering your total is just cents above what you can afford, so you have to put an item back. Or finding out your card won't go through because you forgot you paid your car insurance and there is not enough money in your account to cover your groceries. Oh, wrong card, let's try this one. Declined. That's not the one, let's try this one. Declined. Can we split the payment onto multiple cards? Oh, there is not enough on that card to cover it? I'm sorry. Never mind. I'll find out what money I have where and come back. As you walk off in shame worse than any college one-night stand has ever felt. Carrying your infant child on your hip. Leaving your groceries behind because you can't afford them. I wish no one ever had to feel this way, but I also kind of wish everyone had to at least once. Story 26. From the other side, my husband grew up poor and I grew up rich. Apparently, according to him, I often said things that made it clear I had no idea what it was like to struggle financially. I didn't understand why he would shop at thrift stores when, in my own words, Target and Walmart are cheap and unused. I didn't understand why he would put unfinished drinks in the fridge instead of dumping them down the sink. I didn't understand why he bought so many food ingredients when restaurants exist and are less work. Don't worry, I have been explained to and humbled since, and now he can afford things he never had as a kid. Story 27. How misguided the phrase "it will cost more to repair it than it is worth" is when it comes to car repairs. It does not matter if that old car is not worth $500. A $600 repair that you have to struggle to afford is still cheaper than coming up with a down payment, monthly payments, full coverage insurance, and other expenses needed for a decent used car. Also, consider how many laws and proposed laws negatively impact low-income individuals. Emission inspections are a significant example. Story 28. How you accumulate illnesses and health issues from constant stress and lack of medical care. When I escaped poverty, there were a couple of years where I was catching up on all these things just to get myself back to baseline normal. Steroid shots to stop daily migraines, appointments with a neurologist to ensure the migraines were not a sign of something more serious, and checkups on stomach ulcers I developed in college but ignored because tuition was due. All the doctors asked why I had no medical history and were surprised when I told them this was the first time I could afford to see them. Story 29. This is perhaps more applicable to low-income people in urban centers, but you do not get any privacy and everything is always loud. Your apartment is probably too small for the number of people living there, and you do not have a private outdoor space. You can probably hear your neighbors and they can hear you. You do your laundry in the laundromat. You either walk or take public transportation, and you are definitely going to be that child who loses their temper on the subway at some point. Story 30. Being poor is expensive because you cannot buy things in bulk. Story 31. Hunger. I don't mean I was so busy I forgot to eat lunch. I mean never having enough food day after day, week after week, year after year. Story 32. Being poor can leave you with post-traumatic stress disorder. The effects are real and can impact the rest of your life, even if you become financially stable. Story 33. Not everyone who is poor is trying to manipulate the system or is lazy. Most, if not all, people are simply trying to survive. Story 34. Some things can be inexpensive or low cost and still not affordable. Story 35. Hand-me-downs. A nice shirt would be passed down from 5 older cousins. Then my brother wore it, followed by my sister, and then me. There are many school pictures showing me wearing the same nice shirt. Story 36. I was watching a Technology Connections video recently where he talks about the Duracell battery with PowerCheck and why it failed. Alongside his conclusion that many things now come with rechargeable batteries, he also stated that batteries live in the pack until they are needed in a device where they stay until they are dead. No one needed to check the level. When I was growing up, there were 4 AA batteries and 3 AAA batteries that lived in a drawer. You used them while playing with a toy and then put them back when you were done. I guess that's one example. Also, the canned pumpkin pie filling, which makes up about half of the food drive bin, usually just makes the rounds, as it is the same can I would donate when the drive came around. Then there were field trips. It cost $10 and required a signed permission slip, but I had to pass in an IOU. Story 37. Our pipes froze every year because we lived in a poorly insulated trailer. My mother would collect snow and melt it on the stovetop for water to do laundry and brush teeth. That is a hardship people do not appreciate until they experience it every year for months at a time. Story 38. How you can put together some things in the refrigerator and make a great meal. Story 39. Abundance mindset is something that I will never have or be comfortable pretending to have. The universe or God or whatever will not provide. Story 40. The embarrassment of having to write an essay about what you did over summer or spring break and present it in front of your classmates whose families could afford vacations, camping, movie theaters, or even visiting relatives out of town. I used to dread these assignments as they came up every year without fail. Story 41. How expensive it is to be poor. Poor people do not have car insurance, and the tickets are expensive. You work hard to pay a lot to keep a broken car running so you can work and pay for the car. You prioritize bills, and car insurance is always last after food and rent. Things like cannabis and beer are a cheap escape from the daily grind of poverty. When I was a kid, we only had milk for a couple of days after my dad got paid. Now, every time I open my fridge and see milk, I feel rich. Story 42. The biggest thing I remember being judged for was not being able to drive until I was already in my third year of college. At my first fast food job, I remember a girl wanting me to switch with her on the morning shift, which I couldn't do because the bus doesn't run that early. She gave me attitude and said, "You can't switch for something important to me." To which I responded, "If it's important, you should have planned ahead." Then she cried, saying that was mean and that she wouldn't have her car tomorrow. All I could think was, boo-hoo, I don't even have a car. Another instance. After my first professional job, I hooked up with a wealthy woman. We were talking about our past, and she mentioned she wouldn't have hooked up with me if she knew I was a loser who couldn't drive until my mid-20s. I looked at her firmly and said, "You don't know what it's like to have to pay for your own driving lessons in car because you have abusive parents who neither can nor will teach you how to drive or buy you your first car." Story 43. My friend couldn't understand why one of the minimum wage workers at our company couldn't afford a new t-shirt, which the worker said he was saving up for. He blamed it on the worker's priorities and said he should take the money out of his vacation budget. Story 44. It can cause bad money habits later on. I was broke and sometimes very poor my entire life, and I prided myself on my frugality, ability to stretch a dollar, and being a minimalist until I was about 29. Once I started making decent money, I spent it. It was like going on a shopping spree for years. The incredible freedom to buy whatever I wanted. I didn't have to say no to myself about everything. It was intoxicating. Now, after a few years, I have kind of bought everything I wanted. It has created a guilt spiral because I did not save more when I was making so much money. Story 45. A less dramatic point. Put coffee mug's mouth down so mice and bugs cannot crawl in. Store items like flour and rice in containers rather than leaving them in bags to prevent mice and roaches from getting inside. Sleep wearing long underwear to avoid bites. Waking up with bleeding blisters can happen when sleeping on a concrete floor due to condensation from temperature differences. Wash pots and pans before use, even if they appear clean, as rats may have crawled over them in the cabinets. Lastly, what drove my wife nuts. I own a 108 color crayon set that sits in my office. I never use it. When you are that 8 crayon kid in school. Story 46. The tendency to fall into poor spending habits occurs when you are raised feeling second class because you never had anything nice. You feel compelled to surround yourself with things that remind you that you are not poor anymore, but doing this excessively can lead to the same struggles with money. Story 47. That it is not so bad if the family is intact and loving. Story 48. Sometimes your belongings ended up in a pawn shop for beer money. Story 49. You never outgrow it. Even though I make good money now, I still bargain shop, never turn down a gig, and do most things myself before hiring out. I finish one thing before starting another. Food waste still makes me insane. The fear and stress are less, but they never go away. Story 50. As a child, how guilty you felt when your parents had to spend money on you. Story 51. Food trauma. I used to get in trouble for opening milk or eating something I was not supposed to in the refrigerator. Story 52. I grew up poor, with my parents working multiple jobs and relying on church and government assistance for food. My wife and I now earn $200,000 per year, but I am still terrified my debit card will be rejected for groceries. That fear never leaves you. Story 53. Filling the shampoo bottle with water 2 to 3 times after it is empty, because there is a little bit left to make it last. Story 54. Constantly moving to stay one step ahead of creditors means you have no long-term friends or goals. Well-meaning people asking how you are doing when you cannot tell anyone about your situation is a special hell. Especially when you are very young. Health issues that you just endure because even if you could afford a doctor's visit, no adult is around to take you since they cannot miss work. Story 55. Going to Payless shoes for less to get imitation Dr. Martens because my parents could not afford them and many other name brand shoes that I always wanted but they could not afford, so Payless was our go-to store. Story 56. How stress and anxiety become a constant state in your entire household. Even young children who do not fully understand money can feel it. We knew something was wrong. We knew when there was not enough money to buy groceries before we saw the lack of food. We heard the yelling about money. We knew not to ask for anything or risk being yelled at or shamed. It was a constant state of instability. Having no food when you get home from school is very difficult. Going to bed hungry is painful. It is hard when there are no adults in the house most of the time because they are always working. I had friends with large houses, plenty of food, and mothers who made them a snack or cookies after school. They asked how their day was and helped with homework. The mood was light, fun, and happy. Felt like a completely different world to me. Story 57. Being hungry is really painful. Being cold or too hot is no joke. Being made fun of at school is irreparable. When your parents pretty much abandon you, it is frightening. When your parent tried to sell you to men for money and you were able to talk your way out of it, that was the scariest day ever and left you with permanent scars on your heart and soul. Story 58. I have some really horrible memories from the time when money was extremely tight at home, but I forced myself to remember how kind some people were to us. When my mother got us away from her abusive husband, we stayed in a battered women and children's center. The people there gave us everything because we had nothing. They provided food, shelter, safety, clothes, and toys. Nothing was fancy, but it saved our lives and let us get out. When we went to the church food pantry, there were spices in small bags. Someone cared not just that we had food, but that it tasted good. Sometimes they would even have a sweet treat for me. I will never know the names of the people who were so kind. They knew I would not know when they decided to do it, and they did it anyway. There are some truly awful people in the world, but there are also little old ladies dividing cumin into dollar store bags and buying bulk packs of underwear because the new kid at the shelter only had one pair. Now that my needs are met, I can be that person for someone else. Story 59. As a child, I used to climb the neighbor's apple tree to steal an apple to have something to eat. Story 60. All the helpful advice they give is useless when it is advice to buy something. I did not buy $20 shoes to save money, and telling me that a $100 pair of boots would last years was just insulting. I bought $20 shoes because all I had was $20, and the duct tape was not enough to keep my old ones together. When you say, I am broke, a lot of people do not realize it is literal. They think it means my bank account is kind of low and I need to take it easy until payday. This is not the case for poor people. When I say I am broke, I mean my bank balance is either zero or overdrawn, and I am only eating every other day until payday. Story 61. Not having photos of yourself as a child because you were too poor to buy school pictures or yearbooks, and certainly too poor to develop film. Story 62. You cannot focus on things like career, politics, or investments. It is strictly survival. Story 63. Secret Santa is traumatic. Around 3rd or 4th grade, the teacher explained the concept of Secret Santa. We each wrapped a present and brought it to class, dropping it off anonymously into the Secret Santa bin. After every kid had brought a present, the teacher gave each kid a random gift from the bin. I didn't have a good relationship with my parents. We were immigrants, and they didn't really understand how Christmas works in the United States, so I didn't even think to tell them about Secret Santa. What I did was wrap my best toy in some scrap wrapping paper I found on the playground. It was a Hot Wheels Mach 5 speed racer car. My best friend gave it to me because I had no toys. I also had a Star Wars medical droid and 2 stormtroopers that were also rejects from my friend. One melted from being strapped to a bottle rocket on the 4th of July. Another had his leg chewed off by my friend's dog. My misfit toy collection can be sung to Bex. I got 2 turntables and a microphone. I got 2 stormtroopers and a medical droid. That medical droid was kept busy with those 2 damaged stormtroopers. I tell you, when you have imagination, you don't need toys or money. You'll never be bored if you have imagination. Anyway, I reluctantly dropped my best toy into the Secret Santa bin because that's what we were supposed to do. Some weeks passed and finally the big day arrived. Friday before winter break. We would get our Secret Santa gifts. I was so excited, you could say like a little kid at Christmas. Except this little kid literally never had a Christmas before. Never got any presents other than the rejects from my friend. The fateful day arrived and started out wonderful. The teacher walked up and down the rows and randomly dropped a lovely wrapped gift onto each kid's desk. This was amazing. After she gave all the gifts, she signaled to open them and a frenzied whirlwind of little kids ripping wrapping paper began. This was wonderful. And there it was, Boba Fett, a brand new toy in the packaging. It was so beautiful. The classroom was a cacophony of joyous little kid squeals, except one. A little boy was crying. There was a commotion. The teacher whispered and hovered over the crying kid. After some time, the teacher stood at the front of the class. She held something in her hand and raised it high. "Who brought this?" she demanded. No one answered. She shook the object at the class. Still no one said anything. "Who brought this?" she repeated. Finally, I saw what the object was. It was my Speed Racer Mach 5 Hot Wheels car. "Who brought this?" she demanded again. Sheepishly, I raised my hand. In the blink of an eye, the teacher was beside me. She didn't say anything. She simply placed the Speed Racer Mach 5 Hot Wheels car on my desk and snatched the nearly opened Boba Fett Star Wars figure. Quickly, she dashed through the rows and delivered it to the little boy who was still sniffling. A not-so-secret Santa after all. To this day, I still do not like Christmas or birthday presents. When you have nothing at all, you always still have something, imagination and a sense of humor. You value what you intrinsically have far more than all the material goods. I don't like when people say that being poor builds character. It sounds like a cop-out or consolation prize. It sounds like the gift of rejected damaged toys which would make the rich boy cry. But it is a treasure to the poor kid who literally has nothing but imagination. Just clap your hands. Where it's at. I got 2 stormtroopers and a medical droid. Story 64. How happy I really was. I had parents in their 20s with 2 kids. I had no video game systems from kindergarten to 6th grade and always played outside with friends. I experienced hunger a lot, unfortunately, but learned to make cheap alternatives such as tortilla with spaghetti sauce and cheese as pizza, ramen noodles galore, and bread with cinnamon and sugar as cinnamon toast. I made lasting friendships with neighbors and friends and with family who became like my second mother or father. Grandparents who were well off would happily lavish us with cookies and decent cereal, breakfast, and dinners. Things were all right. Story 65. I grew up on welfare and was completely on my own at the age of 17. I had to work much harder for things that most of my friends took for granted, like rent, food, and tuition for college and university. Because I had to pay for everything myself, it took me much longer to get anywhere. I did not graduate from university until I was almost 30. Everyone else had a financial head start of about 10 years. Story 66. I never attended birthday parties, field trips, or played sports as a child because all of these activities cost money we did not have. My children have no idea how fortunate they are to be invited to and attend birthday parties, go on field trips with their class, and participate in extracurricular activities. Story 67. Poor people are treated unfairly if they have anything nice. The dirty looks you receive when you pay for cake mix, frosting, ice cream, and soda with food assistance benefits can really hurt your heart when you just want your child to have a cake for their birthday. Story 68. Lack of proper nutrition and its effects. You can buy boxes of Little Debbie snacks for a few dollars, but a bag of apples costs $8. Story 69. Growing up very fast because I realized how poor I was. I was aware that we lived in public housing and received food assistance very early on. I felt responsible to do my part and not ask or bother my mom for money or anything because I did not want to cause her any stress. Never got to go on field trips or participate in any extracurricular activities, all because we did not have any money. It was a sad feeling, especially understanding why. I felt very different from my friends. This stays with me even today as an adult with a career and financial stability. Story 70. I have issues with food now because there were times when I was younger that I did not know when I was going to eat next. So I will gorge on food and eat until I am sick full because I know what it feels like to be hungry. Some people probably look at me and assume I just have bad self-control issues, but it is a whole other thing. Story 71. What it's like to starve. We could hardly afford groceries. Hunger was a constant companion. 3 meals a day simply didn't exist in my home. I was lucky to get 2 meals a day. Some days, the only meal I had all day was the free lunch they fed me at school. Many times, I'd be watching TV, which I did a lot. At least that entertainment was free of charge, and see commercials for food products, supermarkets, fast food places, and food scenes in TV shows and movies. Such images of food served only to torture me and drive me up the wall because many times I was watching with a growling, empty belly. When I was 12, Mother managed to snag a great deal on an apartment in a two-family apartment house in a neighborhood that was definitely middle to upper class. One of the very nicest neighborhoods in the city. We were way out of our element in that neighborhood. As a matter of fact, we were the outcasts of the neighborhood. We were the poorest people in the neighborhood. We were the only family on welfare in the neighborhood. Out of the dozens upon dozens of kids in the neighborhood, my siblings and I were the only kids who were being raised by a single parent. All the other kids were being raised in two-parent families. Whereas we were the poorest in the neighborhood, our very next-door neighbor must have been the richest guy there. He owned his own successful demolition company. He owned the two-family apartment house he and his family lived in. They lived in their first-floor apartment and their basement while renting out their second-floor apartment. They owned a house in Florida. They owned a fleet of cars which would get replaced with a new fleet every 1 or 2 years. When his oldest son got married, he bought his son a two-family apartment house across and down the street. My sister and brother made friends with a couple of their kids. They would come home with tales of their wealth and all the nice stuff they owned. I've never been inside their home, but I could see into their dining room from our windows, and the furnishings were so opulent, fancy, and expensive. I'd bet their dining room furnishings alone cost more than everything we owned in the whole world. My brother once told me how their mother went food shopping once a week, every week, and how she spent a minimum of $100 each time, sometimes over $200. In our home, our mother went food shopping only once every 2 to 3 weeks, and then she'd spend only around $10 to $12 on food. The highest she would ever spend on grocery shopping was $20. It was a big deal to us kids if and when our mother spent a whole $20 on grocery shopping. One time, the next-door rich guy's youngest kid was hanging out with my brother at our place when the kid decided to go to the toy store to buy himself some new toys. My brother tagged along. A couple of hours later, they both came back with a huge armload of toys, mostly Transformer toys as that was the hottest toy around that time, and deposited them on our table. My brother's friend, who I think was around 8 years old, I was 9 years older in my teens, then took out his cash change from his purchases out of one pocket and his wallet out of the other so that he could transfer his change into his wallet. I was standing right behind him as he opened his wallet. My eyes bugged out of my head. Inside were 50s, 20s, and some 10s, lots of them. A very thick wad of them. I don't recall seeing any 5s or 1s until he stuck his change into his wallet. Now he had some 5s and 1s in there. I don't know the exact amount he had, but he definitely had more than enough cash on him that could have paid for our rent and groceries for about 6 months at least. Imagine an 8-year-old kid walking around with that much money in his pocket. More than most adults. All the cash I had at that very moment was a lousy 3 cents. 3 pennies, which literally represented all the money I had in the world. I didn't even own a wallet. What for? I never had enough money on me that necessitated the need for one. Later, my brother and his friend left, taking the toys with them. I went straight into my bedroom. I dug out the 3 pennies I had and slammed them down on top of my bedroom dresser and stared at them. They were all tarnished. They didn't even have the decency to at least be shiny pennies. Man, being poor sucks. It sucks even more when you've got real-life rich people living next door to contrast your life with. Story 72. When you grew up on the reservation, we reused McDonald's cups, and your personal computer is always 15 years behind. Story 73. Generic puffed rice cereal with powdered milk mixed with water. Story 74. Seeing your mother cry because her card was declined at the Dollar General. Story 75. In the early 1970s, we lived in a house with no electricity or running water for over 10 years. We heated the house with a wood stove, used kerosene lamps for light, and listened to a battery-powered radio for entertainment. We used a small outhouse for relief from nature and bathed in a steel tub once a week. We wore hand-me-down and second-hand clothes and got new shoes once a year. When it was warm outside, we played outdoors, and when it was cold, we stayed inside. We had a few toys, some books, and also went to the library. Sometimes we went to a movie or similar activities. Mom was an excellent cook, and we ate simple but good food. We usually had a nice Christmas and received a few presents each. Sometimes we went out to eat when Dad had a little extra money. As an adult, we experienced financial difficulties and were homeless for a time. Luckily, we got back on our feet after a while. It was quite stressful and a life-changing experience. Being poor is different for every family. We did not go without the necessities of life. We just had less than others but made do with it. Story 76. Asking the electric company to extend your service cutoff date by 1 day because that day is payday. Story 77. There is no financial network to help us reach the next level. You are struggling with every step of the ladder, and that is only if your ambition has not been discouraged. Story 78. I grew up poor. I am middle class now, not rich but not really struggling. I have a friend who is a multimillionaire, and she wastes so much food. She buys it, lets it rot, throws it out, buys more, eats some, loses interest, lets it rot again, and throws it out repeatedly. Aside from her multiple houses and the fact that she has not had a job in almost 20 years, the way she wastes food is what I notice the most. I shop for the week at the least expensive store and make enough of something to last me all week for lunch or dinner. I hate it when any food goes to waste. We ate rice and beans, macaroni and cheese, and hot dogs all the time growing up. Going out to eat still feels like a splurge, and wasting food is upsetting. Story 79. Midnight moves. Changing where you live in the middle of the night. When this happens often, you may have no childhood friends. Any memorabilia, such as trophies and photos, is usually lost. You learn not to get too attached to things or people. Story 80. I had to actively stop overstocking my pantry. My husband would ask why it always needed to be so full, but I was afraid that if something bad happened or an unexpected expense arose, I wouldn't have food for us or our children. We know how to be creative and stretch everything. When my oldest was a baby, we didn't have any money for Christmas. I spent half my food budget for the week on a small pack of diapers. I tore apart an old pillow, took some mismatched fleece and grocery bags, and sewed him a stuffed animal with arms that crinkled when he grabbed them. 9 years later, it is still one of his most prized possessions. Story 81. The feeling of inconveniencing people if they spend money on me. When I was a kid and stayed the night at a friend's house, I always felt really guilty if my friend's parents ordered pizza or bought ice cream or something. I was worried about them spending too much money on me or us kids, or seeming ungrateful. I marvel at children who have no problem asking their friends' parents for a particular meal or treat. I understand it is totally normal. It is just hard to relate to. Story 82. You never escape the trauma of poverty. It is a post-traumatic stress disorder response. I am 41 and have spent the last 20 years of my life raising a family in relative wealth. My children's childhoods are the opposite of mine. They have gone to the same school their entire lives, while I went to 9 schools in 12 years due to constant short-term leases. They have never seen an empty fridge, whereas I never saw a full one unless I visited friends. My daughter has an $8,000 flute and plays it beautifully, but I was not able to join the school choir because that was extracurricular, and I needed to be home to watch my sisters while my mother worked. However, I still worry about housing security. The kids have to eat everything on their plates but cannot finish the milk bottle. I buy in bulk even if it is unlikely that I will need bulk supplies. Story 83. A ski vacation or any vacation is not something everyone can do. It was surprising to hear people say, "Oh yeah, in the spring we went for a week to X, in the summer 3 weeks to Y, and sometimes a week to Z during the fall, but it wasn't always that great." You just sit there thinking, all right, I had pizza one time during one of those 5 weeks. Story 84. A poor person can be working just as hard and be just as smart as someone making a lot more money. Story 85. How much you get bullied by children in school could be one reason. Story 86. Boredom and anxiety are such miserable states of being. You own one book, maybe one movie, and that is what you have to entertain yourself with for years on end. You end up doing reckless things just to avoid dwelling on how boring being broke is. Story 87. I was never poor as a child, but my parents grew up during the Great Depression. I am always reusing things, looking for discounts, searching for sales, going to thrift stores, and I never order expensive items on a menu. I am retired now and do not want to run out of money. Story 88. Many of the formative experiences of childhood are not experienced by children in poverty. Vacations, birthday parties with friends, family nights out, a place you call home instead of just where you are living temporarily. Simply having time with your parents and probably having two parents. Children from middle-class and upper-class families don't really think about money. It is essentially a foreign concept to them until they become adults. Children from working-class and low-income families understand money because there is never enough of it. They know this because the food runs out toward the end of the month, or because they get a hole in their shoe and their mother cannot afford a new pair. Story 89. You know you are poor, but you do not realize how poor you are. Story 90. How a $10 or $12 item is a lot for some people and cuts into the budget for the whole month. Story 91. As a child in a poor family, you feel like a burden to everyone. Your extended family, adults you encounter daily, even your church, until they eventually ask you to stop coming due to your family's inability to tithe. Church 1 for 3 months, can't tithe, please stop coming. New church 2 for 1 month, can't tithe, please stop coming. Church 3, 4, and more. Change cities and start over at 1. You have no stable community and feel passed along from one place to the next, even if you still have one or both parents. You feel like a burden being passed along through time with little ability to break the cycle until you become an adult yourself and find a way to rise up. Even with money later in life, you still feel the pains of your poor childhood. There are much deeper scars caused by other things that come with a poor childhood that are much harder to talk about or even type. Story 92. Being poor can be expensive because you cannot afford to buy in bulk to save money, nor can you buy premium versions of items that last significantly longer than cheap versions. Story 93. Period poverty is real. Yes, you can get a cheap pack of pads for less than £1, but it might be a real choice between pads or a loaf of bread, so you can at least have toast to keep hunger at bay. Also, learning to drive. My mom couldn't afford driving lessons for me when I got old enough, and when I started working, I couldn't afford lessons because I was paying for food, rent, and bills. So your employment options are restricted because if you can't get public transport there and back, you can't apply, and if you can't apply, then your chance of earning more to be able to afford driving lessons is limited. It's a vicious circle. Story 94. You cannot budget your way out. It is not a matter of having money and being unable to manage it. It is that there is no money, period. It is really hard for middle-class people to grasp. Poverty is not skipping a vacation this year. It is that there physically is not enough money to cover everything coming in. Story 95. The inability to make and maintain friendships stems from not sharing many hobbies, interests, or backgrounds with people at school. I didn't have cable television, so I couldn't talk about new Disney Channel shows. My parents couldn't afford for me to participate in hobbies I was interested in because everything required money: sports leagues, musical instruments, dance classes, Girl Scouts. When you only see your peers at school and have nothing in common besides your classes, it is really hard to make friends when everyone else talks about SpongeBob, equestrian classes, or dance routines they are learning. I didn't start feeling confident enough to form meaningful friendships until middle school, when I could join more activities at school on my own without needing my parents to pay, such as art club, anime club, and speech and debate. I finally had access to shared interests with my peers that did not involve financial barriers. Story 96. Food insecurity. I am 60 and even now, having no debt and being in a good situation, I still hoard food and keep any leftovers. I remember going hungry or only having a small portion to eat, with no seconds. Story 97. You never throw away any food, whether finishing your dinner or eating leftovers the next day. Story 98. I will craft unusual meals from canned and frozen goods, or whatever I can find before I go to the store to buy food, as it is unnecessary. I have no limits. It gets strange sometimes. Story 99. Going to school with cardboard in your shoes because there are holes in the soles. Story 100. Even if you marry up or have a long-term relationship with someone who has never been poor, You still carry the fear that the money will run out and the guilt when you buy something for yourself after going back and forth on it for 2 days, while your partner can simply choose to buy the things they want without a second thought. Story 101. The strange relationship with food that poverty can create is real. Even now, eating is a stressor and a chore, despite having plenty of food available. All my friends are food enthusiasts who love grocery shopping, exploring cuisines, and cooking. I have painful memories of food insecurity that may never disappear. I maintain a healthy weight and have no appetite issues, but I hate spending more than 5 to 10 minutes on anything related to food. Eating or simply watching others eat often makes me sad. I eat the same thing every day to avoid thinking too much about it and to get it over with quickly. Story 102. Being poor is the most expensive thing that can happen to you, not only financially but, more importantly, mentally. Your mental health is what propels you in life. I believe it is the most important aspect of being human. Money will literally fix all of my problems. And before someone says, money doesn't buy happiness, or some other repeated nonsense, they do not know and never will know. Story 103. I am 55 years old and I always eat something before going to bed. Throughout my entire childhood, I went to bed hungry. When I went to basic training, I actually gained weight. Story 104. Being hungry and cold makes it difficult to sleep. I think my body is 2/3 government cheese. I lived off it for the first 10 years of my life. Story 105. It's the pathological money-saving habits from childhood that you can't shake as an adult. My biggest two are: 1. Ziploc bags are worth the price of a new car and should never be used unless the fate of the free world is at stake. 2. All parts of the animal must be used, including the plastic Tupperware it comes in from the store. No, we are out of sour cream. That's the leftover miso. I told you that. I grew up with my elderly grandmother in rural Alabama. She grew up in the Great Depression. Her Depression-era habits continued for life. We would go foraging on weekends in the woods to collect greens, berries, and roots. Nothing would get wasted, and Grandma would get very upset if we threw away anything that may have once been edible. It's funny how trauma changes and shapes who you are for life. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.